This is the Regional and Corporate Services Committee meeting, and exciting day because a number of us are meeting for the first time in many months in person, socially and physically distanced here in the boardroom. And then we have some of our board members joining us via Zoom. So this is our first time testing out this hybrid system, and so thank you for your patience. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay, and I'll just be watching or listening for board members who are on via Zoom to indicate if they would like to speak or to which way they would like to vote. So if they could state their intention if they wish to vote against the motion. So the first item, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking for approval of the agenda, and late items.
So moved.
Thank you. It's moved by Director Fascio, second by Director Popov. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any, the item carries. Next item.
Next is 3.1. We have the draft regional growth strategy, and we have a presentation from Allison Stewart, who is our manager of regional strategic planning.
Fantastic. We'll wait for Ms. Stewart to come online. And I see the screen share in front of me, and hopefully everybody else should see the presentation up.
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, over to you, Ms. Stewart.
There, now you can hear me.
I sure can. There she is. Good morning.
Good morning. Today I'm introducing the most recent draft of the RGS update. This will be the basis of further discussions with the board, member municipalities, Indigenous communities, the public, and others. With further feedback, we'll move closer to finalizing the plan, hopefully sooner rather than later. So what is the regional growth strategy? It identifies common goals, it promotes coordination between municipalities, regional districts, and Indigenous communities, creating stronger links with the province and promoting the region to investors, residents, and visitors. It is a high-level policy, is not an official community plan, and it informs provincial policies. The Lower Mainland is expected to see very considerable growth over the next 30 years. It'll grow from about 2.9 million today to 4.1 million by 2050. So the FERD could see about 500,000 people by 2050, and that's going to be challenging enough. Metro Vancouver will see an additional 1 million people by 2050, which creates enormous pressures on the FERD in relation to transportation, recreation, housing costs, air quality, and others. It's a growing region, and as you can see, most of the growth will be within the existing urban areas with less growth in the more rural parts of the region. A key guiding principle for this regional growth strategy is collaboration. Without communities, people, agencies, businesses working together, these visions will not be realized. So it's really important to build this sort of collaborative structure with which we can all work with. There was a first draft that was received by the board in 2014, and there was very significant input on the plan leading to that first draft. And this was discussed in the March 2020 report. So that was just immediately before COVID hit. It seems like a long time ago. Since 2014, we've been incorporating the input that we received, undertaking additional analysis such as the Clean Economy Study, working with local governments, the Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure and BC Transit on updating the transportation priorities, incorporating new legislation, and incorporating recent municipal OCP updates. And we sort of let those run their course before completing the RGS. The biggest change between 2004 and in honesty 2014 as well is recognizing Indigenous peoples and communities. The first RGS really had minimal mention of Indigenous peoples. I think there was maybe 1 or 2 mentions of First Nations in the existing RGS. The 2014 draft was a bit better, but input from Indigenous communities identified shortcomings that needed to be addressed. So we did spend time making adjustments to the plan to reflect the importance of Indigenous people and communities to our region. And it also reflects just that the region itself has been actively building relationships with Indigenous communities and agencies at both the staff and the political level. So this is where we are with going from the existing Choices of Our Future RGS in 2004 to the 2050 Fraser Valley Future Plan. The changes between 2004 and 2020, many of the 2020 policies are similar to the existing policy and have simply been updated to reflect new information, new plans, or have been reworded for clarity. There are 3 distinct new policy areas, and any new policies or adjustments have really come about as a result of one of 3 things: changes mandated through new legislation, input from the RGS engagement process, and or new policies to address opportunities or issues of regional concern that have arisen since 2004 and also since 2014. The vision has not changed since 2004, and it is the Fraser Valley Regional District will be a network of healthy, vibrant, distinct, and sustainable communities that accept responsibly managed growth while being committed to protecting the land resource and the natural environment to ensure that a high quality of life is accessible to all. There are 8 RGS goals. I'm just going to briefly go through the 8 goals and the key policy areas just to tie them all together. So the first policy area is, their goal is collaboration. And this is a new section from 2004, and it's to achieve our common goals for the future of the region by encouraging collaboration between jurisdictions, cultures, and neighbors. And that relates to strengthening relationships with Indigenous communities, and then more broadly working together to ensure success with local governments, Indigenous governments, senior governments, community stakeholders, and others. This goal was in the 2014 plan, but it was at the end of the document, and the input from Indigenous agency was really, should be at the beginning, and we totally agreed with that. So we moved this section into the beginning of the plan that really ties together with our key principle, which is collaboration. Economic strength and resiliency. The goal is to realize the region's economic potential by providing opportunities, employment, and education that will grow the economy by building on the region's strengths. So employment and education, the ag sector, clean economy, industry, and tourism. And I think the events of the past few months has really shown that resiliency will be key to the region's future. I don't think anyone thought a year ago that a pandemic would be a major issue that we would be dealing with, but it really shows how being resilient can at least reduce some of the disruption that something this big can impose on a region or province or country. Living well, this is a new section, and some of these again are in the existing plan, but we've restructured to really set this out as an important goal. And that's to ensure everyone is able to maintain a high quality of life, regardless of age, income, or ability. And that's promoting healthy living, supporting arts and cultural initiatives, and protecting and enhancing parks and recreation land. So that would include Experience the Fraser, but other parks and natural areas as well. Community building, to create compact, complete communities that strengthen urban cores, maintain rural character, and offer choice and affordability in housing. So we look at urban and rural policies, resorts, though at the larger scale resorts, as opposed to small individual resorts, affordable housing and homelessness, which has very much become a concern for the province. And I think as the province has directed that housing needs reports be taken into consideration in the development of OCPs and regional growth strategies. And I think a lot of the work that we've done over the years in relation to the homeless counts and social housing inventories have enabled us to incorporate that work into our RGS as it stands. But we will be, in future regional growth strategies, we'll have to take everyone's housing needs reports into consideration when updating in the future. Ecosystem health, to protect the air, water, and biodiversity in which we depend. So monitoring and studying and improving air quality, protecting watershed health, and protecting biodiversity. Transportation and mobility, to develop an integrated, safe, and efficient transportation system for people and goods that promotes transit, walking, and cycling, and minimizes the transportation system's impact on air quality. So self and efficient transportation options, active and alternative transportation. We have been working, as I mentioned before, we have been working very closely with municipal staff, BC Transit and MOTI, to update the regional transportation priorities. Many of the 2004 priorities had been completed by 2014 when the draft came to the board, and we had updated those priorities at that time. And in turn, many of the 2014 priorities have been met. So we've been working to update the priorities, and the map that is in the document represents input from a lot of different people on that. We are also, regional municipal staff are also engaged with the province on its Fraser Valley Transportation Plan that was in the paper a few weeks ago. So they are well aware of our process, and we are awaiting to see a final terms of reference for their plan. So we will be bringing, once we get more information on that plan and their planning process, we'll be bringing that forward to the board for information. Infrastructure and services, so a goal to provide efficient, sustainable, and cost-effective services that contribute to compact and sustainable growth, safe and efficient access to basic utilities, responsible management of solid waste, public safety through emergency management planning, and minimizing the impact of large-scale corridors, utility corridors through the region. And finally, energy and climate change, which is also a new section, and that is driven by provincial legislation as to the need for monitoring and reducing GHG emissions. So to increase energy efficiency and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in order to minimize the region's impact on climate change and to mitigate impacts on climate change on our region. So promoting energy efficiency, and developing the capacity to adapt and mitigate to the impact of climate change. And some of the work in recent years we've been doing with the Agriculture Climate Adaptation Initiative sort of reflects that. In that case, it's helping agriculture mitigate impact of climate change, some of which they're already starting to see. So in terms of the RGS timeline, we are at phase 3. And we will be taking this later draft back to our member municipalities, Indigenous communities, and others to refine the policies. One of the major challenges that we're now facing is with engagement, and how in the past you would just have a face-to-face meeting to discuss these things, and public open houses and that sort of thing, which with COVID is a challenge. So we will be looking at our engagement strategy to update to reflect what we can do with the limitations of COVID. And there's some very interesting technologies that have been developed that certainly can help improve engagement going forward. And we also need to be working with Indigenous communities to find out the best way to engage, just more generally, but also within this COVID environment. We will bring back an updated strategy once we've completed that. Where in March, we were hoping to move a bylaw forward by early 2021. The COVID delays will likely push that back into mid 2021, but we are moving forward, and we want to see this adopted, and because I think it's a plan for the future, but it also acknowledges a lot of great work that's being done within our municipalities in relation to all of these policy areas. So I think having this as showing what this region is about today and into the future will really be important. So upon adoption, there is implementation, and that will be municipalities will be required to update OCPs with updated regional context statements, which a lot of the recent OCP work also took into account a lot of the work that was done on the initial draft. So a lot of the broader principles are already embedded into many of the municipal OCPs already. And then RGS monitoring program, at this point, it is still a hard copy type of document, which we brought forward in last year. And one thing that we're looking at developing is more of a dashboard sort of situation where we will be able to update more quickly and have more information available to the public. So that will improve our monitoring program in the future. And that's that. Questions?
Great. Thank you, Ms. Stewart. And are there any questions?
Yes, Director Engar here.
Go ahead, Director Engar.
Thank you, Chair. Very good presentation. Thank you very much, Ms. Stewart. The question I have is there's a couple of graphs right at the beginning of your presentation that are not on the current draft that we have in our agenda. Are those available? They really outline very clearly the population we should expect. That'd be something I'd like to share with my community. Is that an acceptable thing to do at this time?
Yep, absolutely. These were just prepared for the presentation, but we can actually easily provide this to you.
That'd be much appreciated. And
we can provide the slide deck.
Sorry?
We can provide the slide deck.
Oh, very good. Thank you. And one other quick question. Then phase 5, what are you looking at for a rough timeline? And I understand there's challenges ahead, but any ballpark figure there?
For stage 5 is more of the formal adoption, and that actually is set at, I think it's 90 days. So it's about a 4-month process in terms of the bylaw and getting official approval from municipalities. So that's a very formal process. We're hoping to have engagement completed by the summer. At this point, we just don't know, and we need to find out how best to engage First Nations. So that was one area that we got some great input from people of the river referrals, but we didn't get as much input from other communities or other agencies. So we need to find a better way of getting their input into the plan. So I'm hoping sort of next summer to get it to the point of bylaw, and then it'll go very quickly through the timeline set out in the Act.
Very good. Thanks for the feedback.
Raymond?
Thank you. And any other questions? Go ahead, Director Raymond.
Thank you. Yeah, a very good presentation. I'm just wondering on the OCPs and the number of OCPs in the rural areas that are not completed and haven't been done for a long, long time. Is that process going to be involved in this so it can be caught up so we can have a proper report done?
In terms of with electoral areas, the Act sort of deals with municipal OCPs as opposed to electoral area OCPs. So in terms of the time, like I'm not, I know there's a lot of work I've been doing on updating the EA OCPs. They do need to be consistent with the regional growth strategy, and they've been consistent with the existing regional growth strategy. So it's not a situation of having, there is no RGS and now we're into this new one. But in a lot of the OCP updates that I've seen from the EAs, they certainly incorporate the principles that are in the current regional growth strategy and also the draft regional growth strategy. So as that work moves forward, they will incorporate the RGS.
From what I'm hearing, it's and I don't want to put words in staff's mouth here, because I know there's a lot of there's going to be a lot of challenges in how we move forward with the OCPs in the electoral areas, and any OCPs for that matter, regardless in municipalities or electoral areas. But it sounds more like this will be could be a parallel process. It's not a requirement to complete them prior to the RGS, but it sounds like a parallel process moving forward. And certainly, I know there's been a lot of in the electoral area directors that I've spoken to, there have been a lot of desire to complete those that important OCP work in the electoral areas. So we wouldn't want to put something on the shelf in favor of working on the RGS, but if we could get to work on moving both of those projects ahead, because they're both equally important.
Yeah.
Ms. Kinnaman?
Yeah, if I can just add to that, as most of the committee is aware, the Fraser Valley Regional District will be going through a strategic planning process in October. And in advance of that, we will be holding a small EA director workshop to talk about some of these kinds of things at a strategic level, some of the existing work that's underway, as well as some of the work that staff believe needs to be undertaken over the next couple of years, so that everybody going into that strategic planning process, this was with intention to bring this to you in September, so that it kind of whets your appetite for that discussion in October, but also to make it very clear what the impacts are throughout the organization for some of the other projects that are underway.
Well, I have to say I'm kind of disappointed in what I've heard. I can't understand how we're going to have a regional growth strategy done without bringing the OCPs in the rural areas up to date. That's all I got to say about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, I definitely hear the concern. I know there's work that's being done on a number of the OCPs. I'm far less, I guess I'd be far less as kind of in tune with where those processes are, but I think from what I hear from Ms. Kinnaman that the EAs will have an opportunity to discuss that more in depth and determining where the priorities lie and what energy goes towards completing those OCPs. I also hear that we're still a ways away from bringing the final RGS. I would tend to agree with Director Raymond that it wouldn't make sense to bring a completed RGS document prior to completing the work in the electoral areas for the OCPs. But I don't know what the necessarily the staffing complement that would be required to do that, or what kind of projects are underway, or what kind of priorities would need to be shifted around to complete those. But I tend to agree that it would make sense to have the OCPs completed prior to the RGS and have them feed into the RGS. Any other comments or questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Director Alexis.
It's a comment and sort of a question. Just spending time with developers reading material in the Vancouver Sun and elsewhere about the impacts of COVID on the Valley as far as more people than ever coming to the Valley. And I'm wondering if the COVID syndrome has already been reflected in the planning of the document and where those numbers are going. I know we've got some initial numbers of where, based on our OCPs, I expect, but I've been talking to so many people who have told me that are in Metro that they cannot get enough stock necessarily in the Valley right now because there's so many people coming. So I just wanted a comment from staff with respect to the phenomenon that we're seeing and we're experiencing. People are discovering us, in droves. So just a comment about that. And then I just have a question about regional growth boundary. So if I could have a response, first of all, about that.
Yeah, in terms of growth, our projections are on the high end. So they do kind of take that into account. And you're always going to have, spurts of growth and then slower growth. So it's sort of an average over time. It's really hard. I know Metro Vancouver did some scenario work last year and unfortunately it didn't include pandemic in it. But there's some people see that it may slow growth in places because migration or immigration is limited. Mm-hmm. But we may have a different situation. But this is going out 30 years, so certainly time to adjust over time. It does take in a higher population.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I have just one other question, and that's with respect to the boundaries. The regional growth boundaries are set. They are reflected in our OCP. Do we see a significant shift in the boundary with respect to the numbers?
I think long term, we'll have to take a look at that, and this will be going back to staff to get a little bit more detail in terms of how in the longer term will we address this type of growth. So the plan itself is in a way, it is it's like 10 or 15 years, though we go out to 30 years. So that is something that some of the scenarios are kind of scary in terms of where are all these people going to, and the bigger infrastructure questions longer term that everyone is going to be sort of having to address.
Right.
The number is kind of out there, and the municipalities, as they're doing OCP development, obviously look at where their projections are and what kind of infrastructure requirements are going to be. We just sort of provide that over sort of a bit of an umbrella, and the boundaries in the plan do reflect we definitely get the municipal input of where they see that is based on municipal urban growth boundaries. Yeah. So this is a draft. So one of the questions we have to our colleagues, municipal colleagues, is just to confirm these boundaries are reflecting plans.
Right. Right. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Other questions? Go ahead, Director Pranger.
Just a question. Has this information been shared with Ministry of Transportation? Our growth is either made better or worse by the lack of infrastructure programs, and some of the critical priorities here, I think, need to be addressed with MOTI as soon as possible.
Yes, MOTI has been, through the chair, the MOTI has been at the table, so they are aware of these priorities. And hopefully with this transportation, the Fraser Valley Transportation Plan, some of these things will be discussed more directly with the ministry as well. That is a Ministry of Transportation Infrastructure planning process, so that'll also be an opportunity to to make sure that they're hearing what we need.
Any other questions? Director Blue, do you have a question?
You're muted.
I think there might be a problem with Director Blue's audio.
Director Blue, do you have, we seem to think that you are on mute on your side. We can't hear you coming through on our side here.
Sounds like she's having audio problems because she is unmuted, staff tell me. So perhaps Director Blue, why don't you try, I know that some of our members have done this in the past, they've hung up and then rejoined the meeting, and that has corrected some of the audio glitches. It might be one option. Maybe we could go to another question while we're waiting for her to do that.
Sure.
Director Facio?
Go ahead, Director Facio, or we will try reconnecting Director Blue, but go ahead, Director Facio.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Ms. Stewart. Stewart, you mentioned that because beginning in the new year, we're going to be revising our official community plan. So are you going to visit the individual communities? Would it be the staff that you'd be speaking to, or the council as a whole?
We will be talking to staff,
okay,
for sure. And as we go through this process, we can definitely come and talk to councils as well. We're still having to revise our engagement strategy, but we have done that in the past, and be more than happy to talk about where the RGS is and how it relates to your OCP update.
Yeah, the important part for me is that you meet with staff, I think, first, and they can report to us and in regards to how we can work this into the OCP. Thank you.
Thank you. And any other questions? Do we have Director Blue back on the line? Can we try with Director Blue again? We're still not getting audio.
It appears that it's still not working. You can see her, but apparently the audio is not working. Now it is showing up on our end as muted.
Can we try and unmute her?
Yeah, and she is unmuted, but we aren't getting any audio from her. Director Blue, do you want to try and phone into the meeting, and then that way, and using your cell phone, and then that way we'll be able to get your question.
Jay, just a quick.
Yeah, while we're waiting, I'll take a question from Director Popov.
Thank you, Chair. On the same lines as Director Pranger talking about the infrastructure and the Ministry of Transportation, what sort of strategy are we going to take to really push the importance of this?
Sorry, I missed the beginning of the.
It's to do with the infrastructure of the highways, and what sort of strategy are we going to take to really, send the message that this is super important moving forward.
I think part of that will come, part of that we are discussing. We have been talking to MOTI staff who are involved in these broader planning processes already. But I think this Fraser Valley Transportation Plan, that will certainly be an important part of that. And we've definitely, we've instructed them to make sure that there is good political engagement as well as technical engagement on these issues. I think every time that we've spoken to MOTI and municipal staff have spoken to MOTI, we've been reiterating the importance of these not just the planning, but also the implementation of these things going forward. So there is a recognition with MOTI, but at this point, there's nothing beyond what we've already seen. Yeah, so hopefully the reason that they're doing some of this planning work is in order to facilitate moving these plans forward.
Thank you for that.
And while we're waiting, I think staff are just working to connect through to Director Blue, but I do have a question, Ms. Stewart. So you mentioned a number of engagement, there'd be a number of engagement opportunities working with the different municipalities in the electoral areas. I'm curious about municipalities who've adopted OCPs but are seeing new projects and plans, proposals come forward that significantly change or would have significant impacts on their adopted OCPs. We're also seeing significant growth on different First Nation lands, and I don't think those are normally counted in as growth areas inside kind of municipal boundaries when they're doing growth projections for to feed into the RGS. So is there any do you have any comment on how the RGS will accommodate or not accommodate some of those kind of unanticipated changes?
In terms of development proposals that are within existing urban growth boundaries, the RGS isn't a land use plan, so we really, the only real land use aspect is the urban growth boundaries. So if it meets the general goals of the regional growth strategy, there isn't really an RGS issue with that. If it's outside of an urban growth boundary, then you would have to look at an RGS amendment and that sort of thing in the future. But if it's within the urban growth boundary and meets the general goals of the regional growth strategy, we don't get into the nitty-gritties of municipal OCPs or zoning.
So it wouldn't, the RGS wouldn't supersede a municipal OCP in that manner?
Not in terms from a land use. The only time it would be an urban growth boundary issue, but beyond that, we don't get into the details. Okay,
so if in the case of for instance, I'll just use we're seeing some significant development happening here in the city of Chilliwack that's on First Nation land, and it's perhaps was never considered in our own OCP as an area where we anticipated a high level of growth, like multifamily, condominiums, apartments, etc.
Yeah.
So the RGS wouldn't speak to that significant growth because it would be outside of what Chilliwack would consider their urban growth or their urban containment boundary. Is that correct?
Yeah, and First Nation lands are not subject to the regional growth strategy.
Right.
So that is a note, and it's a challenge to get to. I think with land code, there's more structure in terms of development happening within on First Nations lands, but it is to get an idea of what sort of growth projections on those lands is not necessarily readily available. So it is outside of our jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you.
But it does, I think, in terms of when the municipalities are talking to First Nations, it's important to that there is an understanding of the impacts on infrastructure of development, and that any sort of service planning needs to be undertaken, and maybe jointly, in order to make sure that that development can be accommodated.
Thank you.
Director Blue is now joining us with her phone.
Okay, Director Blue, over to you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Uh-oh. I think we're getting
feedback.
Yeah,
I think if you just turn the volume on your computer down, because it's getting some feedback. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, I had my audio on my computer and 2 phones, so here we go. Thank you for your patience with that. Thank you for the report, and I have a couple of questions and comments. One is, and it also relates to growth that we can anticipate. And I was concerned about our ability to provide certainty with the report, given some of the projections on the numbers. And I heard Ms. Stewart say that the numbers were high in the projections, but my concern was actually the opposite. So that sort of caused me to pause a little. And when I look at the numbers for Abbotsford alone, the province has already told us our numbers are around 160,000 for our population. That's the latest numbers that we have. And then when we see the growth that we have in every sector, whether it's residential or commercial or institutional, we're seeing a lot of development already. We've got 5,500 units under application now on the residential side. And so I worry that all of the things that we would need to leverage regionally, with Abbotsford having such a huge percentage of both urban development as well as agricultural land, some of the ag innovation we're going to see is going to have impacts on bringing people here that will need places to live as well, and it's the closest to metro. So that it concerns me a little about those numbers, and I'm wondering, how we might provide certainty as that's related. And I also see some things that appear to be missing to me, and I was thinking again along the agricultural sector, because it's 75% of our land here in Abbotsford. And I see that, unless I missed it, the food security report from the province is not included. And that, I think, will have some really significant impacts for the region and certainly for Abbotsford. And then also just in terms of maps, and I know maps are always a sticky point when it comes to regional growth strategies, but particularly, I was concerned with the study areas in Abbotsford not being included in the map, and those are the areas that we know that we'll see the highest growth. If those go ahead, those are things that will be highest growth, both for commercial, industrial, institutional, as well as for the residential impact. So some of those things are things that really, as I read through it, and I haven't spent tons of time on it, but I think that a regional growth strategy should be such an important reference document for a region, and as such, doing everything we can in its initial stages to ensure its accuracy and certainty as much as we can forecast is critically important. And then, as other directors have said, that we then absolutely reflect this in our reports at the municipal level, and that we ensure that there is alignment and so forth. So just, general comments about my concern about growth and our ability to flex and to adjust as we see growth. I know that, with Mission, and as has already been mentioned by Director Alexis, Mission is also seeing impacts of growth, particularly on residential. And I know that developers are concerned in both of these municipalities with our ability to provide water and sewer and other things that would fall under our joint services. Those impacts are really tremendous and could really serve to undermine the objective that's in this regional growth about attracting talent and so forth for the region. So those are my comments. I'm hoping that staff will have, something that they can add to that will help to assuage my fears in terms of us not being able to really have the most accurate data going forward as our starting point. Thank you.
Yes, through the chair. In terms of the study areas, we can certainly incorporate that in. And one of the questions we've sent to our member municipalities is to take a look at those boundaries and let us know if there's any changes or anything needed before we take it a bit more broadly out into the public domain. In terms of the food security report, I think we had intended in including it, but that will definitely be included in there. I think we've included the clean economy, a reference to the clean economy study, but also we can do that likely within the ag section because it will be critically important going forward. And there's other areas that, right now we're from a internet connectivity perspective, we're looking at the electoral areas. And one of the things that part of that work is identified is that some of the areas within the municipalities don't have very good coverage either. So from an ag perspective, an ag industrial perspective, that's something that really needs to be looked at later, looking at it at another time, but it's definitely issues like that need to support building this resiliency into our ag sector. I think, and I think just looking at the impacts on farm labor that the COVID pandemic has caused, that will likely, this is just me thinking, but just sort of will likely drive more mechanization in some of the ag sectors in our region. So it's definitely things to look at. And in terms of actual growth projections, as I say, it can be, we have it a longer time period, but you're not always seeing the immediate jumps, and how will that last long term? It's a challenge to do that. It's a challenge coming down the other side. I was many years ago, growth in the region or growth in Abbotsford was like 6.5% a year growth, which was it was a huge amount of migration at that time. And trying to figure out what growth was going to be in the future based on that was a real challenge, because you're always either going too high. So it is a bit of a challenge figuring out when growth is going to happen and or if it's going to slow down or what other things are going to happen. So, and maybe it's looking at high, medium, and low projections as opposed to having just one projection. That might be an option as well.
Thank you. If I could just add, I appreciate your response. Thank you. One of the things, last year we saw our highest growth ever, both in terms of numbers as well as development permit value. And this year we are outpacing it by far. So that, 2 years isn't a trend, but it's certainly growth in both of those years. And, we've seen some interesting things, just a quick aside, but in terms of agriculture, because, in terms of being able to feed ourselves and others, I think that's such an important piece of our infrastructure, if you will. It's certainly an asset. And as it currently stands with the migrant workers and others that we're bringing in, one of the things we just have before us that's coming up for public hearing shortly is we have a proposal for a residential, it looks like an apartment building in Abbotsford that's being built by, or supposed to be built by one of the farmers to house their migrant workers. And it's a building that would be adaptable to a future use should that change. So rather than trying to house people on farmland, they'll be able to use the farmland and house people in the urban area, freeing up farmland. And it looks like a really interesting proposal. And as forward as it has, it may create others that would both add to housing stock, but also add to agricultural production potential. So, some of those things are an innovation that we hadn't really thought about when we thought about ag innovation. We think more about agri-tech. But all of these things, and including what you mentioned, Ms. Stewart, about the ability to have broadband to these farms is absolutely critical. And I know that all the providers are there, and there's a federal fund to access and all the rest of it, but getting it to be part of the plan and getting it to be funded so that it can happen is another piece. But I'm encouraged that that's the case, and that this piece of the food security piece will be in there, and that, with going back to staff and in the member municipalities and getting the very latest information so that the projections can be as accurate as possible is very much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And one final call for questions before we move on to the next item. I don't see or hear any, so thank you, Ms. Stewart, for your presentation. Thank you to the directors for your thoughtful comments, and we look forward to continuing to work on this project. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item is 4.1. We have the draft Regional and Corporate Services Committee meeting minutes of July 14th, 2020. There's a motion for your consideration.
Thank you. That's moved by Director Pranger and seconded by Director Raymond. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor. Opposed if any, the item carries. Next item.
Next item is 5.1.1. We have the FVRD Air Quality Management Plan discussion paper. This is an information item, but staff is on the line and available to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you. And any questions from directors? I see Director Ross. Just wait for her to come off mute here. There.
Yeah, it was a little tricky this time.
There we go.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, awesome report. A lot of great information and strategies. Just one comment that I had that I was wondering about in the introduction, the very first paragraph there, it says, well, air quality in the Lower Fraser Valley is generally good, and a number of pollutant levels are showing a downward trend. This is not always the case. I'm just wondering, given, you know, reading through the report and reading the content, it points out the fact that the trend for the future is for them to increase. In page 97 of the report, of the agenda 9 of the report, it says that recent emission data projected a steady increase in GHGs, and like for some pollutants, the increase is the projection is for them to increase. The only reason I think it's important for that to be included in that sentence is because unfortunately when people just read something that it's showing a downward trend, some people often use it as justification to oppose efforts to reduce air quality when they say, well, you know, what's the big deal? Pollutants are going down anyway. But if we do, you know, make the point that, well, we still need to be very careful and cautious because the trend is for an upward trend. So I guess that would just be my only comment, that we add that small little piece, the sort of but in there to that sentence.
Yeah, thank you. Good comments, Director Ross. I don't know if staff wanted to comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm certain that we do have staff on the line. Mr. Lance Lilly is here to answer any questions, but I think we can certainly take that feedback and make sure that it's a little bit more clear in the introductory section of the report. I think it's a really good point. Many people read the executive summary and the last page of a document and maybe don't understand the finer points that while overall maybe the situation is good, there are certain aspects that are going to continue to increase.
Yep, thank you, Ms. Kinnaman. Any other questions from directors? Director Alexis, did you have a question?
Yes, it's more of a comment. On page 100 of the document, it lists the various things that impact our air quality the most. And to me, that's the most significant part of the document. And I would wonder how we share this with the community. So I know when we were part of planning in the previous term with respect to our strategic objectives in air quality, and we decided that we would educate the community more than perhaps be punitive in measures to change behavior. And just wondered, since this to me is a significant part of the educational part of that, how are we doing with sharing the message, and what are the hopes with this paper in sharing the message in the Valley?
Ms. Kinnaman?
Sure, we have Lance Lilly on the line. I'm sure he can answer that one.
Mr. Lilly.
Hi. Good morning. Thank you for your comments. With regards to outreach and letting the community know about this plan, we do have a plan in place for dealing with stakeholder consultation, meeting with member municipal staff, and having it available on our website and dealing with sort of at a stakeholder level. In dealings with, how to communicate some of these very important air quality messaging to the public. In addition to our current program, we are in year 3 now of an air quality in the classroom program, where we go around to grade 5s, grade 10s, and we discuss, some of the basics about air quality, what makes this airshed important and so sensitive. And we're looking at moving that forward again this year, trying to adapt it for, the possibility of online learning, how we can proceed with that lesson plan in the fall. That's underway. And then as far as we're still brainstorming about, we cannot have, the public meetings aren't necessarily available. So it's a challenge. You're right. I mean, how to get the message out to the community. It is going to involve talking with stakeholders and allowing the message to get out in a directed manner. But what's really important about this is that we follow, the academic approach to this. We need it to be science-based, and we have the data. It's just conveying that data in a simple format.
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. I know we had some discussions about how, or the potential around building some educational functions right around some of the air quality monitoring stations, and maybe even including some kind of interactive educational material in some of our regional parks, and specifically where, you're thinking of some of our hilltop parks or mountaintop parks where some of the degraded air quality becomes very apparent. And I really like the idea of not just working in the classrooms, but working outside of the classrooms. And I know Ms. Barker and I have had some conversation on that as well. But definitely, I think the success of some of the in-classroom learning has been tremendous, and I get feedback as the chair from some of the teachers that have utilized some of our educational material from the FERD, and it's fantastic. And the commentary is always that they want more. So definitely good work by staff in these areas with some exciting potential to grow.
Mr. Chair, I think that actually Ms. Barker had some additional comments that she can add to the dissemination piece of this conversation.
Fantastic. And I see Ms. Barker there. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that although the document that you're seeing today is, rather lengthy, and I feel it's written in a way that's well understood, it's not a very exciting document yet. And we have plans in place to make this, and work closely with our communications team to make this a really cool document. I'm excited about it. Marina's been working hard in the background to think about, how to communicate messaging even through this document itself. Maybe we can have some pull pages from the document that can easily be translated as communication pieces about some key messages throughout this document. So I really think that this document itself can be an education piece as well, with some infographics, etc. So we're excited to take that next step, but we really wanted to get feedback first on kind of the fundamentals of the plan before we kind of take it to that next more kind of interactive document that people can learn from. But it is our hope to make it that.
I'm really excited to hear that, because one of the things I was thinking about as I was reading this through is how do you take some of the goals that we break down in the document and pair them with some very simple actions, simple, concise actions that are tailored to our population, tailored to residents. So if our goal is to improve community environmental health or to improve air quality visibility, here's some things that you can do. So to empower the public to take action in improving our air quality here in the Valley. So I think there's a whole host of possibilities that we can do with this, but great work. Any other questions or comments from directors? Don't see any. Let's move to the next item.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Director Alexis. Sorry.
Sorry to thank you. I just wanted to say that I firmly believe that the regional district has to show absolute leadership with this and sets the standard that we can all follow. So you are providing the gold standard for all of the municipalities to fall under, and so it really has to sing. And so I'm really looking for that kind of, I guess, message moving forward, that we are part of a collective, we're working together, and this is the direction. And whatever we can help with, the member municipalities let us know, but it really has to be strongly led, I believe, by the regional district.
Thank you, Director Alexis. Next item, please.
Next item is 5.2.1. We have the Mount GM toilet installation and kiosk replacement. This is an information item, but I'm quite certain that staff would be happy to answer any appropriate questions on this report.
Thank you, Ms. Kinnaman. And I note your use of the language, any appropriate questions to this, so that's excellent. Any questions on this important project? And it is an important project. We've got one of these facilities, at least one installed, I believe, up at Elk, and they work very well and are key in some of the goals to help ensure that our backcountry and natural areas stay so clean. And are there any questions from directors?
Director Facio?
Go ahead, Director Facio.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank the staff for an interesting project. I've never heard of anything like this, and considering the remote area that this kiosk is being fitted with this washroom, I think it's a great project. And
Thank you, Director Facio. I know staff were very excited about this. You're breaking up a little bit on us, so I apologize if I interrupted you there. But I think we definitely got the bulk of your commentary, and I know logistically one of the more challenging areas.
Am I still with you?
I hear you now. No, we lost him. All right. We'll see if there are any other questions or comments from directors. And then if we get Director Facio back, we'll let him finish. Don't see any. Director Facio, you still there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can. Yeah, we got you.
Sorry. Just finishing up by congratulating the staff for a great project. I hope we can extend this project to other areas of our regional parks and trails. I think it's a great job. Well done, and thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Director Facio. And I don't see any other questions or comments. Thank you to staff on putting this together. Next item.
Next, just moving down to item 7, reports by staff. I just actually wanted to take a quick moment to thank our IT support team. Over the past 6 months, they have been extraordinarily helpful with a really strong customer service focus, but most recently, my direction and the board's direction to make this possible, this partial in-person attendance while still having some folks on screen through video conferencing software. It hasn't been an easy task for them. They have pushed really hard, and in fact, I've been made aware that a number of our staff were actually here till midnight on Friday before the long weekend, just to make sure that everything's working smoothly. Obviously, the need for increased broadband and rural connectivity remains an issue for many. There's only so much that we can do with our investments in technology if on the other side, either hardware or wireless technology fails. But I'm very, very pleased with this setup. I think it's working really well, and I just really want to thank our IT team as well as our legislative services team. They've certainly been working with them as well. So thank you very much for that.
Hear, hear.
Next is reports by directors, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kinnaman. And I'll turn to directors who we have on Zoom, if there are any reports by directors. Don't see any or hear any yet. Let's check one more time. Anyone on the line that have any reports? No? Okay. And to the vast boardroom audience here, any reports from directors who don't? I'll just say quickly, it's nice to see everybody. I hope everyone had a wonderful summer. I know as we moved through our first summer of a pandemic, there was a lot of learning opportunities for everybody and for all levels of government, and the expectations were there from our residents and constituents, and I think everybody really just tried to do their very best to continue to serve the public. I know the regional district worked hard, and I just want to take the opportunity to thank the staff here at the FERD. I know each of you in your respective communities have hardworking staff as well, working around the clock to try and keep things going as best we can. It is certainly challenging, but our approach to how we manage our operations through the pandemic is certainly evolves sometimes daily. And, you know, when I get to come into this building, I don't hear any complaining. I see staff pulling together and working extremely hard, and I am very proud and thankful for the work that they're doing to keep us going. So thank you very much. And any other comments or questions before we move to the next item? Don't see any. Next item.
Next is public question period for items relevant to the agenda. As has been past practice, we did make the opportunity available to the public to provide email submissions before 1 p.m. on September 8th. And of course, since we have enabled this partial in-person attendance, the doors have been open today and available for members of the public to attend. We don't have any here today, and we did not receive any emailed submissions.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda would be
for a motion to adjourn.
Director Facio's item. And that is adjournment. That's moved by Director Facio, seconded by Director Popo. All in favor? And we are adjourned.